Shotyk here to make a presentation. And we're also very pleased to have a number of students from grade 8, St. Antoine Daniel, our neighbors, welcome, and their teacher, Miss McIsaac. So welcome, really nice to see you all here. So at this point, I'd like to call on Dr. Shotyk to make his presentation. Welcome.
Thank you very much. The one that says push. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And special thanks to the council for the opportunity to present today. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to be talking about the artesian springs of the region of the Wye River watershed, how Mother Nature creates, maintains, and provides the cleanest water on earth. I'm here representing the University of Alberta, and I'm here also representing the Elmdale Foundation. So I put together a brief outline of my presentation. First, I'm going to explain my connection to this watershed and summarize very briefly my studies of the groundwater. I started studying the groundwater approximately 28 years ago, and explain how we believe the water is being created. And then this question about the cleanest water on earth, why some of us think this may well be the cleanest water on earth. And then the question that I'll leave you with is how to protect this water for future generations. So first, my connection to this watershed. I'm from Toronto, so in fact, the area of Toronto where I grew up at the time was the village of Swansea. And so usually when I tell people where I'm from, I don't say I'm from Toronto, I'm actually from Swansea. And it's a beautiful part of Toronto. It's right downtown, but it's very green, and it's surrounded by parks and ponds and lakes. And it was just a very beautiful place to grow up. But at some point, my parents bought a small farm property north of Elmdale. And this is what the farm looked like approximately 1938. And this is me in 1972 when I was in the 8th grade, when my father bought this farm property. And I was just over the moon that he had bought this little farm. If you notice the river in the background, that's the Wye River. It's a very historic river, as all of you know. But notice the lack of trees along the banks of the river. And because the settlers removed all of the trees, they also removed the trees along the banks of the river, they didn't realize that those trees were holding the soil in place. And when you remove those trees, you lose farmland because of water erosion. So when I was in high school, I started planting trees on the farm property to protect the farm from erosion. So if we fast forward the video cassette, this is what the farm looks like today. We've planted approximately 25,000 trees, more than 50 different species. Kentucky coffee tree, cucumber, magnolia, sycamore, blue ash, blue beech, hop tree. It's become a little botanical garden. And if you notice now, we've got trees growing along the Wye River, and those trees are there to help hold the soil in place. And I must say, it's amazing what Mother Nature will do when given a chance, and this property has become a little sort of ecological paradise. So that's my connection to this area, but the focus of the presentation today is about the groundwater. And this is the artesian spring on our farm property. And I still remember the day I went to this farm for the first time, 1972. I was in the 8th grade. And the farmer opened that valve, and we drank water from the spring. And for a kid from Toronto to drink water that's coming right out of the ground, I didn't understand this at all. Where the water is coming from, where the water is going to, why the water is so clean. But that water has fascinated me ever since. So my groundwater studies, so I'm going to summarize 30 years very quickly for you. So I studied at the University of Guelph, the University of Western Ontario, University of California. But when I moved to Europe, I started working at the University of Bern in Switzerland. I was at the University of Bern for 12 years. I set up my first laboratory at the University of Bern, and I brought with me some of this water from the farm. And here I am at the University of Bern with my laboratory, and that laboratory was set up to measure things like nitrate and phosphate and chloride. And I was fascinated by the water from the farm because I couldn't measure any nitrate or phosphate. So I knew that the water was very, very clean. So this is the type of research I was doing at that time. And again, I did that for about 12 years. And I realized that the water is very clean in respect to nutrients that we worry about in terms of eutrophication, like nitrate and phosphate. So I knew it was clean water, and that became the reference water in my laboratory. So nitrate below the limit of detection, phosphate below the limit of detection, and chloride under 1 part per million, less than 1 part per million. And I do want you to remember that number, 1 part per million of chloride. And I've tested many artesian flows in the area in Springwater Township, in Tay Township. I moved to the University of Heidelberg in Germany in 2000, and I spent 10 years working at the University of Heidelberg. And I was a professor there and director of the Institute of Environmental Geochemistry. My research specialty is studying heavy metals in the environment. Copper, nickel, zinc, lead, arsenic, all those sorts of elements. We set up an ultra-clean lab to study trace metals at really low levels. So filtered air, the lab's made of plastic, very expensive, very sensitive analytical equipment. And we did this to study heavy metals in ice cores from the Canadian Arctic. So we got a core of 300 meters, representing 15,000 years of snow accumulation from the Canadian Arctic. And I can tell you that the cleanest ice in the Canadian Arctic is between 5,000 and 8,000 years old. The cleanest ice layers, more than 5,000 years old, and they contain 5 parts per trillion of lead. That's a very small number. It's a tiny number. You can imagine ancient ice in the Arctic doesn't contain very much lead. The groundwater on our farm property has 1 nanogram per liter. The groundwater on our farm property has 5 times less lead than the cleanest layers of ancient Arctic ice. It took me about 15 years to figure that out, okay? That's a very small number. A part per trillion of lead, that's like 1 liter of water in Lake Huron. Lake Huron is about 1 trillion liters. It's a tiny number. Very few labs in the world, maybe 2 or 3, can measure at that level. The number is so low. The number is so low, I had to design and build dedicated groundwater sampling wells just to do the water testing. And this has become the Elmvale Groundwater Observatory. So that little cabin there, which I call the chateau, okay, I call it the chateau, it contains 2 dedicated groundwater sampling wells. This has become the scientific standard of water quality. Okay, so here's that little cabin. Inside that little cabin are 2 wells. One is stainless steel, one is acid washed, high density polyethylene, plastic. Special plastic from Denmark, shipped to Germany, cleaned in acid, shipped to Canada. Those wells flow all the time, but the water is so clean, the ambient air that we're breathing would contaminate the water during sampling. So I have to filter the air. So this is the only facility of its kind in the world where the water is sampled within a clean air cabinet where there are no dust particles. This has become the reference water for our studies of bottled water. I've studied bottled water from all around the world. We've published a number of papers about this. All of the bottled waters from all around the world are all contaminated because of leaching from the plastic or leaching from the glass. And I know that because the water from the farm, the water from the Elmvale Groundwater Observatory, is our reference water. It's cleaner than all of those bottled waters. So, I'm now at the University of Alberta. So I do have a day job. I'm just here on vacation. This is what I do for fun. Some people go on holidays, some people test water. So at the University of Alberta, I've been there about 7 years now, and we've set up a beautiful new laboratory, ultra clean, filtered air. The whole lab is made of plastic. It's called the Swamp Laboratory for studying trace metals in soil, water, air, manure, and plants. And my focus is studying the lower Athabasca River watershed, studying the snow, studying the water, the moss, the berries, and so on and so on. Here's a picture from Jasper National Park. We think of the great beauty of the Rocky Mountain parks that we have in Alberta, and no question that they are beautiful. But if you look at the groundwater in Alberta, here's the thing that I want you to know. Some of the groundwater in Alberta, in many places, you cannot drink the groundwater because of the salt content, because of selenium, because of arsenic, because of fluoride. That has nothing to do with pollution. That's Mother Nature. It's geology. Some of the groundwater that I study in northern Alberta has 3 times more salt than seawater. Again, that's geology. So we are very fortunate in this area to have beautiful spring water that we can drink right out of the ground. A lot of people don't have that. And of course, in Alberta, we also have hydrocarbons. This is an outcrop of bitumen on the Athabasca River. There's at least 35 extensive outcrops of bitumen between Fort McMurray and the Firebag River. So there's inputs of salt water to the Athabasca River, hydrocarbons to the Athabasca River, nothing to do with industry, has to do with Mother Nature and geology. So we've published many, many papers about the Athabasca River. Our reference water is from the Elmvale Groundwater Observatory. Everybody in my lab, all of the staff, all of the students, all analyze the water from Elmvale because it's so clean, it's the gold standard. So how is this groundwater created? Very simply, in the hills to the east of Elmvale, the so-called Simcoe uplands, we have glacial deposits, boulders and gravel and sand. These are very permeable materials. This is where the groundwater is being recharged. And down in the Elmvale clay plain, in the lowlands, we have lake sediments from Glacial Lake Algonquin, very fine-grained sediments, and these are our areas of groundwater discharge. So in cross-section, here's a cartoon of the hydrological cycle in cross-section. In the uplands, coarse-grained material in those hills, we have water percolating through those hills and becoming filtered. And then down in the lowlands, where we have all of that clay, fine-grained lake sediment, connecting the two, we have aquifers, which are channels of sand that contain the water. And because the uplands are elevated compared to the lowlands, the water in the lowlands are under pressure. When we drill a hole, we have an artesian flow. And the amazing thing is, if I look at lead, for example, I can see that Mother Nature has removed from rainwater roughly 99.99% of the lead that was in the rainwater. So soil is Mother Nature's perfect water filter. And that's what's filtering our water and making that water so clean. And those layers of clay are protecting the water from contamination. So, is this the cleanest groundwater on Earth? Fair question. Well, I've already mentioned that in terms of nutrients, nitrate, phosphate, we can't measure any. The levels are so low that we cannot detect them. I've talked about the trace elements, and I used lead as an example, and I said that lead is less abundant in the groundwater than ancient Arctic ice. Organic contaminants. People worry about herbicides, insecticides, hydrocarbons. I sampled all the waters in special bottles from these various artesian flows, shipped them to a colleague in Switzerland who's a specialist for organic contaminants in water. Not only could he not measure anything, he could not detect anything, and he said, "Bill, I've never before seen such clean water." John Cherry. Professor John Cherry is the world's leading expert on groundwater. I'm not a groundwater expert. He has written the textbook on groundwater. He studied groundwater around the world. I asked him, in his words, how does he define pristine groundwater? He said pristine groundwater has less than 5 parts per million of chloride. I told him that our water has less than 1 part per million of chloride. And at first he didn't believe me. He said, Bill, that's impossible. You can't have under 1 part per million chloride. I gave him my data from Switzerland. I gave him the data from Germany. I gave him the data from the University of Alberta, from the University of Ottawa, 4 laboratories, 3 countries. All of the data is consistent. We have below 1 part per million of chloride. John Cherry has told me he's never before seen cleaner groundwater anywhere in the world. So yes, I think this is really exceptional groundwater. It's not just excellent groundwater, it's exceptional groundwater. And we've started to work on the age of the water. It's very difficult to determine the age of the water. Some of the water is very young, but some of the water, for example on our farm, right now, don't quote me on the number, but it looks as though it's on the order of 3,000 years old. So this is really scientifically remarkable, ancient, clean water. John Cherry has also said the single greatest threat to groundwater in Ontario is the Ontario Ministry of the Environment. And that's because of their lack of understanding of the groundwater resources of the province. That's not my quotation, that's from John Cherry. He's the expert on groundwater. So how do we protect this water for future generations? This is a question I'm going to leave with you. I don't know the answer to the question. I did write to Dalton McGuinty, who was Premier back in 2007, proposing that we create a blue belt zone of groundwater protection, because this is a really unique resource. I've also created the Elmvale Water Festival. We've been doing this now for 12 years. The first festival in human history where you can drink all you want for free all day. Okay? And we've had a lot of positive feedback about this. We do this at the Fall Fair. That's the symbol, that's the logo of the Elmvale Water Festival. We've had some great feedback from people. And we've also helped to create this structure for the artesian flow in the village of Elmvale. And again, we've had a lot of positive feedback. I must say some of the councillors on Springwater Township Council have been pleased to get so much positive feedback from members of the community. And we still intend to build an educational display for that kiosk so people can learn about the water while they're filling up their water jugs. And this was created in part by the Elmvale Foundation, which is a federally registered charity for environmental education. More information is on the website. So future generations, how do we protect the water? As they say, I leave that question with you. I'm just a scientist, okay? But I do want to let you know that we're starting plans for a new groundwater research initiative. So John Cherry has asked me if I would lead this and bring together Canada's leading experts on groundwater to start to understand, to start to study the water systematically, to try to figure out where is this water coming from, where is the water going to, how fast is it moving, and to better understand our water resources. And we'd very much like to have the support of your township for that project. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Shotyk, thank you very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. Just wondered if council had any questions at this point. Ms. McIsaac, I wondered if either you or any of the students, because I understand your course of studies are closely related.
Okay, email me their questions.
Yeah.
bill@elmvale.org.
And we'll make that available here too, Ms. McIsaac, if you want to get that, we can provide that to you. So once again, Doctor, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Very interesting. Obviously, a lot of people attended to hear your presentation because we don't normally get a lot of people out because our topics aren't quite as interesting. So we really appreciate you taking the time while you're on vacation to make that presentation to us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.